Let me ask you this, a preliminary question. Are you at this point the only announced Republican for the office?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so then we get to the realities of Westchester County with a 100,000 margin of Democrats over Republicans. How do you hope to overcome that? That fact of life. I mean, there's no denying it. There's no getting around it.
That's a great question. The district attorney race, I think more than any other race, is not based on party registration, because there's not a Republican way to fight crime or a Democratic way to fight crime. It's about competence. It's about judgment. Janet DeFiore was elected as a Republican, and we could talk about that if you want later, the fact that she switched parties. But every DA election in this county throughout history has always resulted in a Republican being elected district attorney. Now, people voted for her as a Republican. Now she's a Democrat. If she is the Democratic nominee again, I believe that a lot of Republicans, for good reason, feel frustrated with her leaving the party. But also a lot of Democrats that I've talked with have lost respect for her for the fact that she so easily switched parties under questionable circumstances. Also, by the time this election is over, I will be all over the county. I've already talked to hundreds of people, and I'll tell them personally about what I've done, what I want to do as the district attorney, and what issues I think are important, such as re-emphasizing working with the police, fighting for victims of domestic violence, having real trial experience at the top of the office, which is missing right now. Those are the type of things that I will communicate to everyone in Westchester, and I'm confident that that will lead to our campaign winning in the end.
Dan, who approached you to run? Did you decide this on your own and you went to the party, or did they come to you?
It was neither one. I was always interested, as I said, in being a prosecutor, and I've been active in other campaigns in the county. And when she switched parties, a few people, not necessarily the leadership, but people did come to me and say that I should run based on my experience for district attorney. But I always felt that the district attorney position in Westchester was the greatest job in the county, maybe even beyond the county, and it was something that I definitely was interested in running for.
What is do you think domestic violence, which is your main background as a prosecutor, is that the single biggest problem in Westchester, or what? What do you?
Well, for the people who are victims of domestic violence, it's the biggest problem for them. There are problems that, fortunately, many people don't experience domestic violence, and they have other problems. There's growing gang problems in much of Westchester. There's auto theft. There are homicides in certain areas of Westchester. Narcotics are a problem. So it's not just domestic violence. But being trained in trying domestic violence cases is a training ground for trying the toughest cases that there are, because victims, for good reason, are afraid of testifying. The evidence is more complicated. The psychological issues are tougher to deal with. So being trained in that area helps me prosecute other types of crimes also.
We're talking to Dan Schor, who is a Republican candidate for district attorney. Believe it or not, it's more than a year away, but we're talking about the election anyway. Which
2009.
Yeah, it's, before you know it, we'll start hearing about county executive candidates too.
Exactly.
And I don't mean Andy Spano, who's a perennial, but
the executive for life.
Yeah. Dan, what's the? I mean, it probably isn't too soon in the sense that you have to raise a lot of money to do this. I mean, it cost, I think, your at least putative opponent, I guess, because she hasn't formally announced, but you know, I think Janet DeFiore spent $1 million.
Yes.
$1 million. That's a lot of money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right now she has about $100,000 in the bank. I have a little bit more than that, but not much more. I know she'll be able to raise a lot of money. Her husband is a big partner at Davis Polk, which is a huge law firm. Right. This is an expensive race. I know that there's a lot of time that I'll need to spend raising money, and we're already doing that. We've held several fundraisers. Mayor Delfino in White Plains hosted a fundraiser for us in May, and there'll be some other high-profile fundraisers this fall. It's definitely a reality, but I went into this knowing that that was going to be a factor, and I'm ready to raise the money I need to raise.
Are there any programs or initiatives or efforts that Mrs. DeFiore has undertaken in her time as DA that you would absolutely get rid of them altogether? Any programs you would eliminate? Any initiatives that she has started that you would eliminate?
I think the problem is that she hasn't had initiatives, and there's been a more lackluster atmosphere in the district attorney's office. It would be easier for me to tell you things that I would initiate that are not being done in the DA's office than to tell me things that she has done that I would get rid of, because I don't think she's really initiated new programs.
One of the factors in this race that I've already mentioned is the Tony Castro, getting into the politics here and the running aspect of, you know.
Right.
Now, Tony Castro is a Democrat who ran twice, ran against Jeanine Pirro, I guess the last time she ran, and came within about 7 points, I think.
Yes.
There were a lot of things going on with Al Pirro at that time, that probably made that a close race, closer than it might have been. And then he ran again against Janet DiFiore. There is talk, I don't know how real it is, but it's certainly out there that he's, possibly going to take a stab at it again to run against her in a primary. Are you expecting that? Do you hope that? Do you think that will happen? Because that could only benefit you, I would think.
It's not a focus of my campaign.
Yeah.
I'm expecting it only because that's what everyone has been saying. I know people who have talked to him and said he's running, but that doesn't change the issues I care about or the message of our campaign at all. Mm-hmm. They'll fight out their Democratic primary, and our campaign will be ready for whoever comes out of that.
Are you? So what are you doing now? You're going to. You told me you went to Kinsko Dam for a fair that was there. And
We've been
that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. This weekend, 2 weeks ago, we were at the Hispanic Heritage Festival talking with hundreds of people. News 12 Westchester covered that. We were at the Indian Heritage Festival last week, and the good thing about these fairs is that people of all ethnicities come to them, and it's really a broad spectrum of people from around the county. So I've been out there with an army of volunteers handing out literature, talking to people, telling them about my experience and the problems I see in the DA's office, and several things that I want to change in the DA's office, which if you want to talk about, I can.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. Also, one of the things I remember that Mrs. Pirro talked about was she always had budget fights, in terms of money for the district attorney's office. Do you think the DA's office is adequately funded now? And what would...
I don't. Everyone who is an assistant district attorney has turned down opportunities to make more money elsewhere in the private sector. And that's part of the job. People go into that knowing that. But it is tough, especially for people who are married with children, to be prosecutors. And I've seen many top prosecutors leave because they just can't afford to support a family on that income. And if we want to keep and retain prosecutors, I do think we need to pay them more. That's not just a Westchester issue. That's an issue throughout the state.
What are they paid? What were you paid when you were ADA?
When I started in the DA's office in Queens County, I turned down several law firm jobs that were very well paying to earn $34,000 a year. And
what year was that?
That was 1998.
$34,000?
$34,000.
So 10 years ago, yeah.
And I remember I had a summer internship at a law firm where I earned, in that one summer, maybe almost as much as I made as the DA the next year. And I told the partner I worked for that I was turning down their offer to become assistant DA. And he said, well, you're throwing away your law degree. And I'll never forget that line because becoming a DA was the best decision I ever made. Yeah. But it is tough. Salaries went up. When I left the DA's office in 2005, I believe my salary was in the 70s. I believe it's higher now. Mm-hmm. And for a single person, which I am, you can afford to live on that. But the people with families and kids have problems.
Right. And there is a turnover, isn't there? I mean, it's not just because they're mad at the boss. I mean, it's because they want to make more money in the private sector. And
there's not a turnover like there is now. We've had 25% of the assistant district attorneys resign in the last 2 years. That is unprecedented. And I know, excuse me,
sure,
a lot of them are my friends. I worked in that office. They tell me they're frustrated. They're told that they can't try cases unless they're very easy, slam dunk cases.
Yeah.
They work with the police. They can't bring cases to fruition because of the bosses in the district attorney's office right now. In the last month, I've had 2 current assistant DAs talk to me, excuse me, and tell me they're frustrated and thinking of leaving. And I've been asking them to hold on, to stay there, and that help is on its way.
There was we're going to get a little gossip here. When Jeanine Pirro left the office, that there were all kinds of stories were coming out of the woodwork about real personality feud with Janet DiFiore. Did you hear any of that when you were?
Well,
you left in 2005.
Right.
Did you hear any about conflicts like that? I mean, a little gossip. Can you give us anything?
Everything I've heard is 5th or 6th hand,
okay.
So it's completely unreliable, and I don't base any of my conclusions from that stuff.